Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. How can a pregnancy that is called textbook still end in stillbirth? In today's episode, I'm joined by Val, wife, a mother, and a bereaved mom to Harlan, who was born sleeping at 37 weeks after what doctors described as a beautiful pregnancy. She shares how her first pregnancy was complicated by HELLP syndrome and an early NICU stay, but her second pregnancy was treated as normal until the day that there was no heartbeat. We also talk about delivering a baby in a silent hospital room, the long tail effects of grief 13 years later, and what it looks like to move forward without moving on. Val also shares how her daughter's life inspired years of supporting other bereaved families and how grief doesn't disappear, it transforms. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Val. Val, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Certainly. Thank you so much, Sarah. I live in South Dakota right now. Swore I would never live in North Dakota, which is where my husband's from, and we moved there in 2006. Swore I would never live in Minnesota, which was right across the river. We moved there in 2017. So I gave up saying where we wouldn't live, and now we're in South Dakota. I love it here. I am a mother to a 15-year-old, an 11-year-old, and then our daughter Harlan would have turned 13 this year. I am a homeschool mom. I call myself a homesteading enthusiast. I would love to do more things, but chickens and gardening are where it's at right now. And that's me in a nutshell.
My husband is really into like a lot of the homesteading shows and stuff, and he's always like, "I think we could do that." And I'm like, I don't know that I could give up my things, but I think doing maybe in between, like doing some things but not going completely.
Yeah. I was all in on all the things, and my husband is absolutely not. So that's why chickens and gardening are where it's at.
So do you mind sharing a little bit about your journey with your daughter who was stillborn?
Of course. So it actually starts with my first pregnancy where I had HELLP syndrome. And at 32 weeks, our daughter was delivered emergency cesarean. She spent 30 days in the NICU. They were always telling me, she's a big girl in a tiny girl's body. And that was traumatic in its own right for us. That was my entrance into motherhood, was life in the NICU. And so going home without your baby and making trips every day to the hospital was just not only unexpected, but not typical, not what you experience when other people have their children, right? And so when I got pregnant again, the main goal was just make it past 32 weeks. If I can just make it past 32 weeks. And I was told many things during my pregnancy. One of them was, you are considered high risk because of your HELLP syndrome, but unless or until you're displaying high risk symptoms, we're not going to treat your pregnancy as high risk. I don't know if that played into anything at all, but it was a little unsettling to hear it at the time. And I remember I made it past 32 weeks. I made it past 33 weeks. And at my 36-week appointment, it was a different doctor who I saw that week. The heart rate was lower than what was usually for her. But because it was still in the quote unquote normal range, and this wasn't my OB, this was just another OB doing the rounds that day, we were sent home. Everything is fine. Exactly 1 week later, when I was 37 weeks pregnant, I felt her kicking me that morning. And I would say it was more aggressive movements than I had felt previously. And I was just like, wow, she's really rolling and punching in there. And I didn't feel right that day either. Like something just physically, I felt off. And I went into labor, and it was, I think I called 3 times. I called labor and delivery, and I would tell them, like, these contractions are getting more and more intense, but they're not, they're so sporadic. They were 2 minutes apart, 11 minutes apart, 18 minutes apart, 5 minutes apart and just all over the map. And they told me all 3 times, take a bath, drink some water. It doesn't sound like you're in labor. But the longer time went on, just the more painful it was. And I was only at that point focused on the pain. And finally, that night, I told my husband, I can't deal with this anymore. It's so painful. I can't move. So we dropped our daughter off with some friends. She would have been 3 years old. And we went to the hospital. It took us a long time to get up to labor and delivery. I don't know why we didn't get a wheelchair when we went in the ER entrance, but I slowly made my way up to the 6th floor. And they put me in a triage room, checked me, and said, well, you're only at a 2. And I thought, how is that possible? I've been laboring all day. And they kept trying to put the fetal heart rate monitor on, and they kept trying to move it. And there was a heart rate, but it was so slow for a baby. And they would tell me to move on my side, and I was like, please don't make me move. It hurts so bad. But I would roll over and the heart rate would surge, and then it would go way back down again. And so they decided to bring in an ultrasound machine. It turns out that the heart rate being picked up on the fetal heart monitor was mine. And when they brought in the ultrasound, we heard those 7 words that forever changed our life. I'm so sorry. There is no heartbeat. And I remember, Sarah, my husband, looking at me immediately, like we locked eyes right away. And he just looked devastated and crushed. But I remember I'm sitting there thinking, why are you telling me that? What are you going to do to get it started again? Like, this doesn't make sense. Surely you can do something. And it just wasn't equating in my brain that this was happening, that this was possible. And so they left the room to go get another ultrasound machine just to confirm. And I went into active labor. I went from a 2 to a 10 in about 20 minutes. And at 16 minutes after midnight on April 10th of 2013, in a silent hospital room, I delivered Harlan. They put her on my chest, and like, she was real. She was heavy. There was weight on my chest. She was beautiful, but she was gone. And I literally gave birth to death, and that day changed us forever.
I relate to so much of what you say because my daughter was also stillborn, and just, I never knew silence could be so loud.
Yes.
It's just indescribable if you haven't been through it. It's like, oh, it's making me tear up because I know exactly, what that feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
She was the only, so I delivered 3 children. She was the only one I was able to deliver vaginally. The other 2 were emergency cesareans. And I feel like having HELLP syndrome and my first being born 2 months premature, I felt like that experience had been robbed from me in a way. But having delivered her vaginally, I feel like even in everything that we lost, she really gave us so much. Things that we wouldn't have experienced otherwise, people we wouldn't have met otherwise, which is it's a really weird thing to wrestle with and grapple with, when I would give anything to change it and have her here, of course, but we can't change it. And so just really looking for those nuggets of the things that we can take away and that are a benefit, and actually even find joy in them, has been something that has stretched me and grown me for the last 13 years.
And I know, I mean, it's been 13 years. So do you ever have to deal with people wondering like why you're still sad or why you're still grieving, or, all of those things that people say, like, why aren't you over it?
Yeah, isn't that a gem? I think because I've been so vocal about it for so long. So 3 months after she died, we started an organization to help bereaved parents. And so we were hosting events and facilitating support groups, and I was always in the newspaper or on the news or saying something about it. And I've just been so vocal about it for so long. Also, like a part two to this is I have always been a crier my entire life. I say that my spiritual gift is crying. And so that has always been a thing that I do. So the fact that you pair that with the vocal, this is my life, this is what we're going through, I think people just learn to kind of expect Val's going to cry, and this is something worth crying about, so we're not going to falter about it or ask her about it 13 years later. But, in the first year, 2 years, 5 years, that was very much a question I got often. Someone else's timeline is everyone put a different timeline on it. Of course, there was no consistency in what anyone thought I should be grieving for or should be over it in. Like, everyone had their own ideas and expectations, and good for them is kind of what I say.
Like, well, I'm glad you could be over it that fast, but
Right.
not me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I always like to ask, how did you come up with her name? It's a beautiful name.
Oh, and thank you for asking, because this isn't a story I get to tell often. But so I am a little OCD, I think. So all three of my children have names that start with the same letter. And we had Haley first. And so I knew I wanted another H name. And we'll still have these two incredibly wonderful people in our lives. They mentored us, they prayed with us, they just were such an example to us and such a support to us, even like just with things in our marriage or giving me a recipe, or we kind of adopted them. And their last name is Harlan, Harlan. And so I told my husband when we were having this conversation about names, I said, I think I've got it. And if it's a boy, we'll name him Harlan, but we'll spell it like their last name. And if it's a girl, we'll spell it like this. And so that was kind of decided. And it's after our dear friends, the Harlans.
I love that. That is so special. I'm
Yeah.
sure that was an honor to them as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It also, probably not surprising to you, but brought up another layer of grief and suffering, because this whole time I've been thinking, gosh, if they just could have bounced their namesake on their knee, if they just could have known the child that we named after them. So
Yeah.
that was a degree of difficulty in the grieving process too, I think. But I do love that she will forever be our connection to them.
I know that you weren't as closely monitored in your second pregnancy. Do you feel like more monitoring would have made a difference, or do you feel like that's just something that wouldn't have mattered?
Hindsight's 2020, right? And I think it would have helped to some degree. At least, when I got to 32 weeks, I started moving to the weekly NSTs, basically, where they were monitoring her heart rate. And I think what would have helped more would have been if the OB I saw at my 36-week appointment would have actually looked at my file and would have seen that for every single week up to that point, her heart rate was in the upper 150s. And at that week's appointment, it was like 144 or something like that, which, yes, is still in the normal range, but for her was not normal. And so I think it's a bigger question of, being monitored more, sure, but what are they doing with the information? What are they going to do with what they're monitoring? So if it's not normal for baby, is not normal, whether or not it's in some book that, it could be this or this. And so I think in some ways, yes, it would have helped. It would have changed some things. But also, no,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have changed anything. And it's more about the care we receive as a whole instead of just, I kind of liken it to being cattle moved through a chute, next, next, next. So that's a non-answer answer.
No, I do understand that though, because I mean, that really is what the experience is like. If you're in a quote normal pregnancy, they're like, okay, you fall within this range, so you're good. Like, we'll see you next week. And,
Yeah.
even when our mind and our body is telling us, something feels off here, but then they just reassure you that, no, no, it's fine. You're in the normal range. But like
Yeah.
you said, maybe that's not normal for your baby or your body. And they do
Yeah.
need to listen to that.
That's that's a broad brush that we can actually use though, right? Because even when we go to the doctor, if you and I went to the same doctor, Sarah, and we expressed that we have the same symptoms, that doesn't mean we have the same ailment. It could be totally different for you than from what I'm experiencing, but it's just presenting the same. It's the same for pregnancies. No pregnancy is the same, and every baby is going to react and respond differently to different things. So once we start treating it like that, instead of this is the range, you're within the range, stamp of approval, then I think we'll really be getting somewhere.
Yeah, it's just figuring out how to get people to do that, right? How to get, first of all, us as the moms, as the patient to advocate for ourselves, which is really hard, even though it
Yeah.
shouldn't be. It's very hard to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
And then also, with doctors, getting them to have the time and the resources and the compassion to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure the more patients they see in a day, the more money they make. And I don't blame them for wanting to make more money. Like, we've all got bills. And let me tell you, though, my bills were in excess because of a NICU baby and then a stillbirth. And, those are bills I would rather not have had. So if I could have been treated as an individual patient rather than a chart number, I think we could have avoided a lot of it. But all I can say now is it is what it is.
And I know with HELP, I mean, I hadn't heard of it, until I had my stillbirth and then met other people in the loss community who had dealt with it. But that's a really serious condition that I feel like so many people are not even aware of. I mean, was that something you had even heard of before you were diagnosed with it?
So, yes and no, I'll say. My mom, when she was pregnant with me, had preeclampsia. And so I had heard of that. And I had never heard of HELLP syndrome. I still don't know what it stands for all these years later. Something about liver and platelets, I know.
I don't really know what it stands for either.
I know it's bad. I know it's really bad. And essentially how it was explained to me was basically preeclampsia on steroids, which that's not good. So no, I hadn't heard of it. And you know what else I hadn't heard of was stillbirth and the fact that 26,000 babies in the US alone are stillborn every year. I thought we were past that miscarriage mark. We were good. Everything was golden. And here's a crazy story, Sarah. I was 7 months pregnant with Harlan and I was at work. A coworker came into my office, and as he did every day, we just sat and talked about whatever was going on. And he told me that his wife had gone to the YMCA. She saw this little boy. She knew this little boy's mom was very pregnant and due any day. And so she asked, like, hey, how's the baby? And the little boy looked at her and said, the baby died. And I remember him telling me this story and me looking him in the eye and saying, Joe, can you imagine being pregnant, going through your entire pregnancy just to have your baby die? And he said, no, I can't imagine that. Who of us can, right? Little did I know that just a few weeks later, that would be my story. But I'm not saying that we should tell every mom when they get pregnant, like, by the way, your baby might die or have these serious health complications. Like, I'm not saying we approach it like that at all. But also, I think if you just plant a seed that there are potential risks, and here's everything we're going to do to make sure that your pregnancy is as stable and viable as possible, I think that would bring such a degree of comfort and not maybe make the mother feel like she's been hit by a freight train when it takes her by surprise.
No, I absolutely agree with that because when we're the ones that are on the side of stillbirth, we are like, what do I do? Like, I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't know this could happen. I was past 12 weeks. I thought, all of those things that go through your head, and nobody has ever prepared us for what to do, what comes next. I mean, I'm like, I had to ask, like, do I give birth to her vaginally? Do I have to have a C-section? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know these things. And so I do agree that we need to find a way to not scare everybody, but to let people know that these things do happen and what to do if it happens.
Yeah. And that's a great point, too, even in the hospital room. So when they put Harlan on my chest, and she was beautiful, they did not tell me why she was purple, why her skin was torn, why her lips were the color they were, like all of these things. I'm just having this baby girl who kicked me that morning set on my chest right now, and all these things. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I did this to my baby. I delivered her vaginally. I tore her skin. I hurt her somehow. I made her this color, all of these things. And there was like no coaching or just like, it would have been so different, I think, if the nurse had been, I'm going to place your baby on your chest. She's still going to be warm because she just came from inside you. Like, even that was something that I was like, what's happening? Like, I couldn't reconcile that she was gone. But all of these just little teachable moments, maybe. And also, there was one nurse, for the most part, I just want to say my nurses were wonderful for the most part. But there was this one. We've heard so many stories, right? But there was this one who just was like, I need to take baby from the room. I need to take baby from the room. And I'm like, you need to take yourself from the room.
Right, like, you get out.
All the time I have with her. She's like, the funeral home keeps calling. And I'm like, you know what? That phone will continue to ring. Like, this is it. This is all I have before they put her in a box and we put her in the ground. Get out of my face. But of course I didn't say that. I was like, well, we're just not ready yet. Like, I had to be the sensible one in that moment, which I'm sorry.
Like, you shouldn't have had to be in that position in the first place.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. So there's always that one nurse that you hear about, and it's like, I know they're trying to do their job and they're trying to whatever they're trying to do, but I think they all need some kind of training in that. I mean, I can't imagine a nurse going through their entire career and not coming across a situation like this.
And, I'm so glad you brought this up, because one of the things that I did through the organization we started was I started going, I was fortunate enough to be in Fargo where there were like multiple colleges in the area, okay, including North Dakota State University. I started going to their nursing classes once a semester. So I got all the students and talking to them about post-bereavement care. I had a presentation that I gave and everything. So many of them came and thanked me for giving them the presentation. And even the instructor is like, we are not teaching about this at all. When they go in for their, whatever it's called, when they're like on the job helping, I can't remember the term for it, but like, they never go through this. And there's so many nurses, when they do go through it, at some point are like, what do I do? How do I handle the situation? How do I care for this patient? But they're not taught. So some of them just wing it. Some of them nail it. And some of them completely miss the mark. I was attending a birth where the baby was going to be stillborn. It was a trisomy delivery. And the nurse came in and said something because the mom's mother was from Wisconsin or something. And so she told a joke about beer. And I just looked at the mom in the bed and she looked at me and she had already told me, like, this nurse is not helping us. And I just looked at her and she looked at me like, and her face was like, do you see what I mean? And I just said, I actually don't think that this was the best time for that joke. Like, I had to say that in the room.
Oh my God. I mean, I'm glad you were there to say it because that poor mom, but it's like,
right. But because I was thinking, if this were me in this mom's position and my nurse is telling a joke about beer, my leg might accidentally spasm and I would kick her in the throat. You know what I'm saying? Like, Val woke up and chose violence.
And I mean, I don't think anybody who's been in the lost position would blame you for that, you know?
Yeah. Once you go through it, that you think things that would be so instinctual and just so natural a response really are not at all.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just, like you said, they don't know what to do and they get really uncomfortable with it because nobody likes to think about babies dying. You know,
Exactly.
it's like a really uncomfortable thing to think about and talk about. And I'm like, okay, but what about us who lived through it? It's
Right.
very uncomfortable for us too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I walked out of the hospital carrying a half filled box with things that the sweet nurses tried to put together for me. I was not escorted to my car. I was not even wheeled out. They walked me to the elevator and we were done. And I was like, but now what? Like, there's this whole life ahead of us that we don't know how to navigate. Like, what just happened? And I think that was part of why everything just felt like such a bad dream, because there was no closure, there was no resolve to it. Like, we were just kind of sent on our way. And
Yeah.
I had no idea what to do.
I had that exact same feeling. I mean, it's just like, okay, one minute you're pregnant and the next day you're going home and you're like, I mean, I was supposed to be going home with my baby. And,
Right.
you have the room set up or, especially if you're very far along in pregnancy, you have their name picked out. I mean, you have all these things and then you just go home like, what just happened?
Yeah.
And what do I even do? Like, how do I even move forward with this?
Yeah. And that's I think such a key verbiage you just used there. Move forward. It's not move on and it's not get over, but
Yes.
it is move forward. Like, even if you have to drag yourself, and let me tell you, some days I absolutely did. That
Yeah.
was the only movement I could do, was dragging myself forward. And people would always tell me, you probably got this a lot too, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it, Val. And I'm sitting there thinking, you think I know? Like, I just wake up and do. I'm not thinking about this. I certainly don't want to do this. And I don't have a friggin' plan. Like, you saying you don't know how I do it, I don't know either.
Yeah.
And frankly, I kind of resent that you think I have things figured out right now, because I don't. And if they were put in that situation, they wouldn't know either. They would just do. And
Yeah.
so that was one thing that was really, I mean, among the many things, right? In support group, we would call them well-intentioned idiots, the people who would say things and they meant well. They really did, but they just said the dumbest things to us. And that was one of the things that we really had to contend with, was just like not slapping people upside the head.
I had to remind myself of that too. Like, they're not trying to be hurtful. Don't.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it is hard when you repeatedly hear that over and over, and you're like, well, I mean, I didn't imagine my life would be like this. I don't know what I'm doing, but we have no choice but to wake up and keep going. Especially, I also had a living child at home at the time. We can't stop our lives because of them, and it's really hard to both be there fully for them while also processing our grief and the baby that we lost.
Yeah, and they know something's up, right? I remember riding in the car one day, and my daughter was behind me. My husband was driving, and I hear from the back seat this sweet little voice pipe up and say, "Mama, is your heart broken?"
Oh.
And I just had been sitting there along for the ride, but then when that question popped up, I lost it. I started crying in the front seat, and I was like, "Yeah, sweetie, it is broken, and I miss your sister, and it's not your fault. It's nothing that you did." And all of these things that we're trying to help this sweet little 3-year-old understand why her mama, who was playing with her on the floor and we were having picnics and adventures and all of this, is now like hardly moving and living on sunflower seeds and coffee. It's a real thing for them too.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that's not talked about often as well, is how the loss of a sibling affects them. I mean, my son was also 3 at the time, so we told him at a level that he would understand, but now he's almost 11 and he's been asking more questions and expressing more things to let me know that it did have a bigger impact on him than what I knew at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is another thing too. It's funny how when you talk about this, things come to mind that you've forgotten, for years. And we wanted to take a no regrets approach. And so we wanted Haley to meet her sister. Like, we didn't just want to hide her or pretend like it never happened or anything like that. And so I remember our dear friend brought Haley to the room, and we had to explain to her that her sister had died and that's why she looked different. And the nurse was taking Harlan out of the little, cradle bed, and to show her to Haley, to give her like a little closer look. And she said, "Be careful, the baby's kind of floppy." Well, for my 3-year-old, that terrified her. To hear that, also in combination with seeing this baby that looked very different. Mm. So especially when my son was born later, my daughter was terrified. He was squeaking and squirming in his little blanket, and I remember she looked up and said, "Is he floppy?" And I'm like, "No, sweetie, he's fine." I mean, just traumatized her on a level that we didn't understand or anticipate. But everything in those moments following is just so impactful. We have no idea.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, I mean, as we've kind of already talked about, people expect like, okay, you've had your year of grieving, now everybody's moved on. And then you go find years later that, wow, it's affecting everybody still, maybe in different ways, but it doesn't go away for any of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've been to one baby shower since Harlan died, and I left early. I was like, I showed up, I did my piece, I'm out.
I still have a hard time with baby showers too. The only one I was able to go to was for my brother, because that was my first niece. And I'm like, okay, this is family. I can do this one. But I have 3 living children, and I still have a hard time with other people's pregnancies and baby showers. And it's just this weird trauma, I guess, that's attached to it all.
Mm-hmm. Well, is a visceral response that you don't even realize you're having. I find like when I hear someone has delivered a baby and that they're fine and baby's fine, I let go of a breath I didn't even realize I was holding, and I don't even have to know the person well. Someone could tell me, like, if a friend says, "Oh, my sister-in-law is pregnant and she's due, blah, blah, blah." I don't know the sister-in-law at all, but I'm always thinking immediately, like, I hope she and the baby are fine. It's automatic at this point.
Yeah, man, it changes so many, like we never view pregnancy and motherhood and, any of those things ever the same again. It kind of ruins you don't ever have a normal pregnancy after that. It's just terrifying.
Yeah. And my pregnancy after Harlan was stillborn, my pregnancy with my son was the closest thing I can imagine to hell on earth. And always hoping for the best, but absolutely expecting the worst. And then when it came down to it, he was emergency cesarean at 35 weeks, and my doctor was in Mexico when I went in at 34 weeks. I'm like, they had already stopped preterm labor with him, and I'm just remembering more and more, Sarah. So I went into preterm labor with him 1 year to the day that I had gone into labor with Harlan. And he was 32 weeks, which is when I delivered his oldest sister. And so everything was just like the weight of all of that weighed on me so heavily. And they put me on magnesium to stop the labor, which I don't know if you've ever been on magnesium, but it's like being drunk and hungover at the same time. It's awful. It's so awful. And so they were able to stop my labor with him. A couple of weeks later, I knew that I was going into labor again. And so I went to the hospital, and my doctor was in Mexico on vacation, of course.
How dare they? No.
Yeah. She hated me, obviously. But this other doctor who was on call, I remember he's calling the fetal maternal medicine people in Minneapolis, because we were in Fargo. So he's calling an even bigger hospital, and he's telling them what's going on. And they're like, yeah, sometimes this happens. We'd probably send her home, blah, blah, blah. And he came in my room to tell me this, and I just started crying. And he goes, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do, Val? And I said, I want you to deliver my son. And he kind of wrestled with that, because I was 34 weeks and a couple of days at the time. And, there's red tape that the hospital has to go through. That's a liability for them, all of this. And I'm like, I've already lost my daughter. Like, don't take my son. So he didn't, though. I was discharged. And a couple of days later, my doctor came back from Mexico. I had an appointment. We ran an NST. I told her about the experience, being admitted and kept overnight. And she just looked at me and said, we're not playing around with you anymore. I'm going to admit you, and we're going to deliver your son. And I was like, thank you. Thank you so much. Like, you've already stopped preterm labor with him once. I know I went into labor with him last week. Praise God, it stopped on its own. And that he's still moving and grooving inside of me. Well, he was taking emergency cesarean, and it wasn't until I heard him cry that I felt like I could breathe again. But then even after that, Sarah, bringing him home, I was like, is he breathing?
Yeah.
Is he choking? Is he, how much has he eaten? He hasn't defecated yet, like all these things. And it was, it was miserable, but praise God now, it was wonderful also. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, the biggest sigh of relief when they put my daughter, who was born after we lost Jasmine, on my chest, I was like, I can't believe she's here. She's breathing, she's okay. And then just like you, though, I mean, even now, my youngest is 3, and all of them, I worry about them every day. Are they still breathing? Are they still, I mean, it's a fear that never goes away.
Yeah. It quite literally paralyzed me for a time. I wouldn't leave our home. I was afraid of things like, if I take my daughter anywhere, I'm going to get T-boned in an intersection, and, she's going to, I mean, I was paralyzed by fear. And I remember I was at a women's retreat. I was emceeing the retreat, so I had to be there. It wasn't like, I just went for the fun of it. And I had said, if anyone needs prayer, this is what we're going to do after this session. And so a couple people had come up to me, and I had prayed for them. And I saw this woman in the back who she was just such a prayer warrior. And I just marched back to her and I said, Lois, I'm scared to death every day. I can't do anything. I don't want to leave my house. I don't want to take my kids anywhere. She prayed for me, and I'll tell you that spirit of fear left right then. Not to say it didn't come back now and then afterward, but I wasn't debilitated by it after that point. And it's a very real thing. And no one, that wasn't something that they were like, also, just so you know, you might become completely debilitated and too scared to do anything. And I mean, like, this sounds irrational, and it is, but we had sold our house and we were living in a first floor apartment until we could find another house. And I was afraid that people were going to plow through the parking lot and just drive into my daughter's room. Like, all of these, once the worst thing happens to you, it's all you can think about are the possible worst things that can continue to happen to you.
Yeah, and like you said, I know that sounds crazy to some people, but a lot of those thoughts you had, I also went through as well. I mean, because you
Yeah.
just think of the worst thing that could happen. What if someone like takes them? What if somebody, I mean, just what if the house catches on fire? Like just all of these things that,
Yeah.
it's like all heightened worry, and it sounds crazy to people who haven't been through it, but I think a lot of people who have been through loss have these same fears, and again, just don't talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly wasn't going to go to work and be like, you don't know how much energy it took me to get here today because I was afraid, that something XYZ would happen. So, yeah, you don't talk about it, but also that was part of why I loved being able to facilitate a support group because, and half the time, Sarah, even though I was a facilitator, those sessions were absolutely for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes, I'm facilitating discussion. I'm here to encourage these parents and to provide resources for them, but also I'm working through my own stuff 100%.
Do you still do any other groups or anything?
No, so we moved away from there in 2020, the perfect year to move. And when we moved away, the organization that we had started, I met with the board and we just all decided that the best and easiest thing to do would be to dissolve because we weren't going to be there anymore. No one else wanted to run it. And so let's just give these resources and these finances to organizations who were partnering with us in the work that we were doing and furthering their mission in it as well. So we moved here 2020. So she would have been 7 that year. And I remember her 7th birthday was so hard. Her 7th birthday probably was as hard for me as her first. And I don't know what it was about the number 7, but it was like the second hardest day of losing her. And so we moved later in that year, and I just kind of felt like we had no strings attached here, and we moved on to some acreage, and I felt like she was as much here as she was with us there. And it just felt completely different. And also, I didn't know anybody here, no one. And so I didn't want to march in and be like, hey, I'm your pregnancy and infant loss resource, start coming to my group or whatever. And so I really kind of wanted to ease into it if we did it again. And I'll tell you, once you're in work like that, it never, even though you stop doing it, it never stops. I still get phone calls. I still get text messages. I still get emails. Val, so-and-so lost their pregnancy. What can I do? Can you talk to them? All these things. So while there's no official organization anymore, the work has never stopped.
And I find that it makes me so happy that people trust me enough to come to me with things
Yeah.
like that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's obviously hard and it's sad but it's so rewarding at the same time to know that you can be the one to help these people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a club no one wants to be in. And I say this often that losing Harlan was the darkest path we have ever been called to walk as parents. We can't imagine anyone walking that path without hope of seeing their child again. I look back on that now. Turn around, I mean, it's a long path now, 13 years later. but I can see the plots of flowers that have cropped up along the way since. Were they watered by my tears? Absolutely. However, had I not walked it, had I not allowed myself to grieve messy along the way, those little bright spots would not be there. And so I'm a believer in Jesus, and the Bible says to rejoice in all circumstances, give thanks in all circumstances. It doesn't say to give thanks for all circumstances, which is how I kind of interpreted that in that season. And I was like, you're asking too much of me, Lord. But even now, looking back, I can be like, okay, I'm 13 years on, and now I can give thanks in that circumstance. I couldn't in the moment, and I couldn't when it was happening. But now I can absolutely give thanks in that circumstance. Because of this, I met these people, because of this, we helped thousands of bereaved families. I mean, there's so many things along the way. And so I think it's just another, if I could talk to someone who is a newly bereaved parent, I would say, yeah, this is the hardest journey you will ever be called to walk. But there is another side to it. And unfortunately for you, the only way to that other side is right through the messy middle. But you have to get through it. Sometimes you'll feel stuck there. Sometimes it will feel like you're walking in circles. But there is absolutely another side.
Yeah. And I know that's really hard for people to see when they're in the thick of it, but there is.
Yeah.
And you won't be crying every day, all day for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I remember the first time I went to the cemetery to visit her grave spot. There was another mom there in the infant section. So the cemetery where she is has an infant section. There was another mom there. And I was so overcome with emotion. I mean, this was the first time I was able to get to the cemetery after losing her. And I wanted to be alone, but here this other mom was there, and blah, blah, blah. So she says, "Did you lose your baby too?" I was already crying, so I couldn't talk. So I just nodded my head. And she came up and she gave me a hug. I thank God that this mom was there. She said, "It's been 11 years for me. You'll get through this." And at the time, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, 11, like, I can't imagine another day, let alone 11 years. And I'm so glad that mom was there that day. Like, I don't think it was a coincidence. Because she later would become just this reminder of hope for me. Like, if that mom could make it 11 years, I can make it one more day. I can get through one more week. I can get through one more, would have been her birthday. So I do think it's important to keep having these conversations. And also, yeah, I'm 13 years on. I'm still shedding tears about this. But that doesn't make me weak, and it doesn't mean that I have not been able to move forward. And you know what? In every leg of the journey since, Harlan is still as much a part of our family today as she was on April 8th, the day before I went into labor with her.
Ugh, you're making me tear up over here too. But yeah, they're always and forever a part of our family. I mean, whether they're physically here or not, their presence is always here.
Yeah.
So if people were interested in connecting with you, where would they go for that?
Yeah, so let's shift gears here quick and pull myself together, right? Also, you'll get really good at that.
Yes.
As time goes on, you'll just be like, yeah, I was just sobbing 10 seconds ago.
Yeah, and you're like, and now I'm fine and getting some groceries or whatever.
Exactly. So I also host a podcast called The Motherhood Experience. And it's a platform where I hope Sarah will join me one day to share her story. I host mothers who just share their own personal, unique motherhood journey. We have all mothers from all stages, all walks of life. Every single episode, I learn so much from the moms who are my guests, and it's just the most favorite assignment I feel like I've ever been given. So you can find us on the motherhoodexperience.com. And if you go to the motherhoodexperience.com/learn more, that's where you can connect with me on a weekly basis. You can also find me on Instagram @_ the motherhood experience. We have a YouTube channel, but all the links are, I don't know. I think they're all on our website.
It's hard to keep track of them all.
Yeah. If you start there, you'll be able to find us all the places, I think, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story and sharing about your beautiful girl with us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Val, for sharing your story with us. I hope you remember that you're not strange for still grieving. You're not dramatic for still missing your baby. And you're not weak for still feeling afraid. Grief doesn't follow a timeline. It doesn't have an expiration date. And simply moving forward never means that we're moving on and leaving them behind. If this conversation resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who may need it. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to follow or subscribe to the podcast. Leaving a review on Apple or Spotify really helps other lost moms find these stories. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.